All right. So last night at Campfire Shabbat, I told a story that introduced what is probably one of the dominant themes of this week's Torah portion. And it can be found on page 198 in the larger of the red books that are in front of you, in the Eitz Chaim. We're looking at Parasha Vayishlakh, which is in the middle of Genesis chapter 32 is where it starts. And this is the moment that Jacob and Esau are starting to come back together again. It's been 3 weeks now that we've been reading this story between the beginning of it, where Jacob steals the blessing and sort of talks Esau out of the birthright, and through all of the trials and travails that we had in the middle. And finally now we have this moment where they're coming back together again. And one would assume, well, this is a coming together again of brothers, this is a coming together again of family, it should be a joyous moment, and yet it's not. That is not the predominant emotion that is being felt, especially by Jacob. We're not sure what Esau's emotion is, actually, in all of this. Maybe he was very joyful about all of this. But Yaakov, as we read, it says, Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, and instructed them as follows: Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I stayed with Laban and remained until now. I have acquired cattle and asses and sheep and male and female slaves, and I send this message to my lord in the hope of gaining your favor. The messengers ostensibly went and said that, and returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau. He himself is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. And then we read verse 8. Jacob was greatly frightened. In his anxiety, he divided his people with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 camps, thinking, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, the other camp may yet escape. The rabbis key into this week's Parsha and say the dominant emotion in this week's Parsha is fear. Jacob is feeling fear. Not only that, but if we look at the Hebrew, the English is not a great translation for this. He was greatly afraid. Well, the reason the English says greatly afraid is the Hebrew actually says it twice in 2 different ways. Vayira Yaakov. Jacob was afraid. Me'od, actually. Very. Vayitzar lo. And he was distressed. It says it twice. And the rabbis ask the question, why is this said twice? We know, for those who have been joining us over the years, the rabbis and the Torah doesn't put anything in here without reason. So the rabbis said, why does it say he was afraid and he was distressed? Wouldn't it be enough to say one or the other? So Rashi has an interesting answer to this, but before we hear Rashi's answer to this, what's your answer to this? Why do we think the Torah would need to say both of these things? Michal? Maybe.
I think it's Jacob's own guilt about what he did to his brother, and also the fact that his brother is coming with so many people, so they're kind of reinforcing each other to make a great feeling of terror.
So Michal, I'll give you half credit for that in terms of being in connection with what the rabbis are saying, right? There's clearly a difference between those two. The question is, what are those differences? And Michal, you said one is he's feeling guilt, right, about what he did to his brother, and the other is fear about these 400 people that are coming potentially to to kill him, right? It's not just 400 people. He's not bringing the women and children, Esau. He's bringing 400 men. Please, Michal.
In addition, the third section would be that maybe in some ways he knows that he is not supposed to feel afraid because God has promised him,
Ah,
he does feel afraid.
excellent. So Michal brings up another point, which we're going to get to in a second, which is, well, wait a second. Why is he afraid? God just promised him all of this great stuff. Did he not have faith in God? Why is he feeling afraid? Maybe he shouldn't feel afraid, and yet he is. Good. Anybody else? Let's see what the therapist thinks.
I think those are two different words, because fear is very primal,
Mm-hmm.
and also emotion. You can't really control emotion, it just comes, right? So you can affect emotion, but you can't control it. So, and fear is more primal. Distress has much more, I think, depth to it and thought to it. So I think they're sets of different emotions.
I love it. First thing that Marge said is that you can't control emotion. Emotion comes. You can affect it maybe, but you can't ultimately control it. And the other thing that you said, which I think is really important, is that fear is very primal. Distress indicates a little more thought and maybe some more depth behind it. Okay. Anybody else?
I think he was afraid of he hadn't actually met him yet.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this big fear, which is understandable, of the unknown. And all this time has built up, and they haven't had any kind of resolution. And I think we know from our own experiences that when we have something hanging over us and we have these unresolved matters, they just get worse and worse
Right.
and worse. And one, I think also, like when I think of this, they translate it here in the Quran as acutely afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like brings up to me the whole fight or flight response.
It very much was a fight or flight
And
response.
he was totally in fight or flight. And
Yeah.
actually there's fight, flight,
Freeze.
freeze, and fawn.
Right.
I just learned the fawn.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other is distress is just this internal, like, whoa, like W-O-E is me, and maybe a little bit of self-pity even, like, oh man, what have I done? I'm like so
Yeah, Jacob has gotten himself into quite a mess, right? He's gotten himself into quite a mess. And there's that sense of guilt, I think we heard. There's that sense of woe is me, of a little bit of a pity party here maybe going on. But what you said also, Diana, which I think is really important, is that anticipation, right? That's hard. That's hard. Waiting for something that you know is going to happen, you're much more afraid before it happens than when it actually happens, right? Not to put our bat mitzvah on the spot or anything, but I'm sure your nervousness was a lot more before you actually started than when you started singing. Like once you start, okay, we're going, we know this, I got this, right? But that anticipation is tough. Yeah.
On the other hand, he's just had a wrestling match with God, right, so to speak, and maybe he's confident.
Not yet. He's actually going to have it. He's going to have it.
that happens.
Maybe he has confidence that things are going to go his way and not Esau's way, and maybe he's thinking, is that good, is that bad, is there going to be destruction, death, what's going to happen?
There's a lot of questions, right? There's a lot of questions. He is in a place that is very fluid, right? He doesn't know how it's going to turn out, and it raises a lot of questions. Brian. Yeah. Yeah. Right? Brian said he's worried that he might have to hurt his brother. And actually, thank you, it's a good segue. We didn't even plan this beforehand. That's to some degree what Rashi says, right? Rashi, who's one of our most prolific commentators on the Torah, said, afraid and distressed, afraid that he might be killed, distressed that he might have to kill. Right? Rashi says there's two sides to this moment. He's got that primal fear, I think. I like the way that you described that, Marge, right? That primal fear of I'm under threat, but as he thought more about it, The distress is, well, in defending myself, maybe I'm going to have to kill my brother. And that put him in a very, very difficult place. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's also foreshadowing to the wrestling match.
Yes.
There's like a physical fear and then a mental, moral, emotional aspect.
Yes. Yeah, it very much leads in, right? The author of this wasn't bad, right? It very much leads into what's going to happen in this Parsha, the wrestling match between Yaakov and the angel, right? And that's kind of what I leaned into a little bit last night with the story, is this idea of wrestling with our fear, right? That was the story that I told last night. So the question is, what does Jacob actually do? Because it's great to say, oh, he was afraid, but Jacob isn't then passive about all of this. He takes a couple of different actions, a couple of different steps, which I think are very instructive in how we deal with fear and how we deal with these overwhelming emotions. Let's turn to, let's look back at verses 8 and 9, right? He was afraid. What's the first thing he did? He divided his people, right? He comes up with a plan. This is preliminary. He's not doing it on the spot. He's saying, okay, I need to think about this. I need to prepare for this. I need to plan for this. And so he does an action that helps him to do that, to plan and to prepare. Okay? Then it goes to verse 10. And Jacob says, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your native land and I will be with you, right? I am unworthy of all the kindness that you have steadfast shown me, etc., etc., etc. Verse 12, deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother. What does Jacob do? He prays. He does. He kind of reminds God. We just tend to do that, right? It's like, hey, don't forget, we have a relationship, right, to God, right? This is long-standing. But he prays, right? He prays. But how does he pray? Our forefathers and foremothers, right, speak to God quite often in the book of Genesis. Sometimes it's telling God, hey, you're doing wrong, right? This is different. He prays with humility. Right? Although I'm unworthy of the kindness, he's not coming from a position of power. He could have just said, hey, God, you promised me. You promised me that everything would be okay. You better keep your promise. That's not how he frames it. He prays with humility. And then he moves on, and let's just look for a moment at the very beginning of chapter 33. We're on page 203. Looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming, accompanied by the 400 men. He divided his children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids, putting the maids and their children first, Leah and his children next, etc., etc. Verse 3, he himself went out on ahead, bowed down low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother, and he ran to greet him. What does he do? He acts. He actually doesn't wait for Esau to come to him. He actually goes out to Esau. He says, look, I've prepared, I've prayed, now I'm going to act. I'm going to go and be proactive about this. I'm not going to just let things happen. I'm going to go and make a difference and be that change maker in all of this. March.
So I think that's so essential to this story is that you have a choice about behavior. You don't have to act on fear in a way that's going to be destructive. And you don't have to act on stress without having some efficacy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what it tells us is, whatever your emotion is, you have some choice about behavior.
Correct. The emotion is the emotion. It's going to hit us because that's what happens. But how we choose to deal with that how we manage that is really up to us. And Jacob shows us a 3-step process, which is really quite interesting, right? There's plan, there's pray, there's act. As we think about that, on how we deal with our own emotions, how we deal with our own fears, right? Planning and preparing actually lessens the intensity of the emotion because it gives us a little control back. It lets us say, okay, well, what can I do? How can I manage this? How can I think about this? How can I compartmentalize? How can I categorize in such a way that's going to help me deal with it? That's number one. So the prayer piece, the prepare piece is what is in our control. The prayer piece is actually acknowledging that some things are out of our control. Jacob had no control over what Esau was going to do. He didn't know. Esau could very well have slaughtered him on the spot. And as a matter of fact, it seems like that's what Jacob believed was going to happen. So the prayer piece of it is an acknowledgement of the things that we actually don't have control over, and putting that out there and getting that support and getting that making sure we put words to that. Prayer is really good at taking words and creating words around those emotions that are sometimes really difficult to manage. It's one of the first things that I learned as a hospital chaplain long time ago when I was a baby rabbi, right? Is that prayer helps us verbalize those things that we don't know how to say. And when we can put them and package them in a prayer and bring them up to God, it's very powerful in dealing with those emotions and getting us unstuck. And then he's proactive. He doesn't wait. He could have just sat back and waited for Esau to come to him, but he said, no, look, I've prepared, I've prayed, I'm going to face my fear. And to me, that is what the story of wrestling with the angel is all about, right? As I expressed it last night in the story, when you ask what its name is, it dispels it. It takes away its power. When you recognize it, when you understand it, when you realize that, hey, okay, as Marge says, these emotions are happening to me, but I now know what they are. I can deal with them. I can work my way through them. It dispels some of the power that these things have. Prepare, pray, and act. And these things ultimately help us deal with these overwhelming emotions that we have. My friends, it's a scary time to live right now. I think every generation has said that to some degree or another. But we as Jews are feeling it. We talk about, people come to me and talk about, should I be outwardly Jewish in the world? I don't know who's around me. I don't know what people are saying. Should I wear my Magen David? Should I wear a kippah? Should I have a mezuzah up on my door? Should my kids say that they're Jewish when they go away to college? It's a scary time. And this helps us to think about it. We prepare, we think about, we talk with our children before they go away to college and say, this is what you might see. How are you going to think about this? How are you going to act? How are you going to manage this? We give them the tools. We prepare. We look for that emotional, spiritual, communal support by connecting in with other Jews through song, through prayer, through celebration, right? Through celebration of what it means to be Jewish. And then we act, and we go out and we do it. And it dispels that fear. It dispels it. Something to think about. It's a very powerful portion, a very powerful parasha for us in this time and in this day and age. Mickey, do you want to say something?
Rabbi, as I think about the sequence of events that led to this particular moment, take a step back, I think there's even a bigger lesson here.
Please.
And it starts with the saying, oh, be careful of the webs that we weave, because they often start with the seed.
Yeah. Yeah, Mickey, I don't think anybody disagrees that to a large extent, this whole thing was of Jacob's own making, and his mom helped a little bit. Rebecca helped in this. And Isaac, to some degree, was complicit, potentially. You could argue, it's hard to tell whether Isaac was deceived himself or whether he was complicit. It seems like he kind of knew in the background what was happening and went along with it. So it was a mess. It was a mess. And, you know, those people who are longtime regulars here know me that when we're in the middle of Genesis, like, this is better than any soap opera. Like, you know, if you want to talk about dysfunctional families and all, just look at the book of Genesis, right? There's a lot of challenges here. By the way, it's one of the things that I think makes this book so powerful is because all of these people are human with human failings, and yet they still have a powerful relationship with God. And it tells us that we can too. We don't need to be perfect, right? We have our failings, we have our issues, and we can still forge a relationship with God just as they did. So there's some power there. But I agree with you. This is of Jacob's making, and he's now dealing with the ramifications of that. And kudos and credit to Esau, who, by the way, the rabbis typically pan throughout the rabbinic literature, right? Esau is sort of made into the villain. I'm going to actually go against that and say kudos and credit to him because he clearly rose above it, right? He rose above it, and when the two of them finally came together, they embraced. Esau had put it behind him. He had moved on. And all of this angst and all of this anxiety and all of this that Jacob was bringing into it, in fact, was unnecessary if he would have actually had communication with his brother for all that time beforehand. He would have seen it was all unnecessary. So the situation was his doing, and the anxiety was his doing, because he created a situation where he could have worked his way through that differently. Yeah. Any other comments before we get to our Torah reading today? Please.
There's almost no mess that you can't recover from. You see it in the book, where always kind of redeeming yourself in a situation.
Yeah. There's almost no mess that we can't recover from. It may take effort. It may not get us back to exactly where we were. That's fine. But I agree with that. I agree with that. Beautiful. All right. Shabbat shalom, everyone.